What happened in March for you?
Well, March was quite a big month for me. I'd been very busy getting the biggest tour I've ever done together. And I just finished hosting a topical radio show for BBC Radio 4 Extra called Newsjack. And I just finished writing on a topical television show as well for Sky. So I was very aware of the coronavirus, but I thought that was something that happened to other people in other countries, arrogantly. So I went off on tour and I managed 4 dates of it. And then the world ended, and I just got to the point where I'd learnt the show and I was happy with it as well, and then it obviously disappeared. And then I thought quite arrogantly, right, well, this will be a nice 2 weeks off, you know, it'll be a fortnight holiday. So I went to Wales, where I'm from, and then obviously lockdown happened, and months later I haven't really left the house.
And so at some point you decided you're not just going to sit by. I mean, maybe, you know, your rent or your mortgage or your need for food decided that you need some kind of income. But tell me how you got from there to being the boss of the COVID Arms.
Well, the first thing to say is I don't get any income from it. So what happened is 2 friends of mine we went to primary school together, called Jess and Jake, a brother and sister. Jake is very technical, and he'd immediately sort of set up an online pub on Zoom for him and his mates and Jess and their friends to have a drink. And they said, listen, this is a bit mad, but we thought, you know, because there's about 30 of us, maybe one night we should put on some entertainment. Would you be up for doing some comedy? And you know, we've floated it past the brilliant comedian Rosie Jones, and she's up for it. And I said, okay. I said, yeah, all right, but being like, this is going to be an absolute nightmare, but they're just very nice people and I'm not very good at saying no. And then they said, well, why don't we sell some tickets? Because if we manage to sell sort of 100 tickets, we can give it to the Trussell Trust, and, you know, and makes it a bit more worthwhile. And I was like, okay, great, well, let me get some other comedians so it's a full comedy night. So I got the brilliant Rachel Fairburn, the fantastic Stephen Bailey, and we put it on sale, and we raised £13,000 for the Trussell Trust on the first one. And
wow.
There was quite a lot of technical issues, but obviously there was a lot of goodwill. But what we thought would be maybe 100 people was actually thousands of people. And then there was sort of a real demand for it. So we were like, well, let's do this every week. And from the outset, brilliantly, Jake and Jess are on the same page in that we didn't want to be another person asking comedians who have no income to work for free. So from the second one, we split so basically half goes to the Trussell Trust and half gets split between the acts. I always donate my fee to charity, so this isn't some like money making scheme for me, but it's a brilliant way of helping people out on the circuit as well who've had everything taken away. And yeah, so we've raised over £100,000 for the Trussell Trust. We set a Guinness World Record about 4 weeks in of the biggest like virtual pub. Whilst we were doing that, we raised another, I think, about £34,000 for Nets charity. And yeah, we've given thousands to comedians and musicians as well who are out of work. So it's basically got a little bit out of hand.
And long may it continue. So you're using Zoom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the one that I went to that kind of put me onto this is the Always Be comedy. Right, so Rachel and Marcus were on, and they have a live front row. Mm-hmm. Do you do the same sort of thing?
No, mine's a bit different. So so everyone we have a front row tickets, which are slightly more, and that comes with a level of interaction if you want it. And then we've got a live stream as well. So the tickets to the live stream are only £2 and everyone chats underneath, but the front row a bit more. And then I compare it like I'd compare any gig. I go, right, let's have a chat to someone in the audience, and they raise their hand. It's a great thing with Zoom. And then Jake will sort of bring them up on screen, and then I'm just in someone's sitting room having a chat with a stranger. And it's absolutely brilliant because it's so much like real comedy in that you don't really know what you're going to get when you start speaking to someone on the front row. And yes, it is quite difficult and different to Always Be Comedy, whose gig I've done, which is brilliant. They've got really dedicated, really enthusiastic front row full of big laughers. But I think it takes a certain type of gig to have that atmosphere and to pull that off. And Always Be Comedy is so well established. That's definitely its brand. Whereas with us, it is a bit weird. You are just kind of doing the gig to yourself. But what is beautiful about the kind of community we've built is they're so responsive online. So what happened is people will come off and there'll just be a wave of love on Instagram and Twitter and things. And basically the validation that us incredibly insecure, mentally ill comedians need, we found a way of doing it. So it's all fine.
So talk to me about that. I mean, I think anyone who does stand-up comedy is A, mad, but B, absolutely fearless. You have to be. But there is that, you do need to ride the energy of the room, don't you? I mean, hearing the laughter is part of how you judge how the next few seconds at least go. So if you don't have that, if you can't hear the audience, how does that change what you and your other acts do?
Well, it's really interesting because I've deliberately, when we've been booking this, we've booked a mixture of sort of telly names and circuit acts that most people wouldn't have heard of, but they're absolutely exquisite and incredibly match fit. And I found, weirdly, the circuit acts have taken to it like a duck to water, because there is no one who knows their 20 minutes better than someone who's out gigging 5 nights a week with it all over the country. They know exactly where every beat is, every nuance, every eyebrow raise to get that extra joke. So the circuit acts have just been great and have just gone into it. I think it's telly acts who gig slightly less frequently or are used to doing longer tour shows have been a bit like, oh, I'm not sure. And some of them feel a bit weird, so I'll stay on the screen and they sort of, it's like a chat and they kind of do it to me. I'm a big laugher anyway. I'm such a comedy nerd, so I basically end up guffawing down a webcam to them. But I think it's been a really interesting thing because you realise there's a lot of stuff you can't hide behind online. Like, for a start, you can't engage your physicality for a joke as much. So sometimes you'd get like an extra laugh out of something by just sort of, like a curtsy that you do after something. And suddenly you can't do that. So you're like, oh God, it really takes a lot of the bells and whistles away. And you realise like it really shows up your writing, a bit like radio. Like, if you can't see how funny the person looks or the face they're pulling, it's just on the writing. So it's been very interesting as a comedian because you spend years trying to hone your voice on stage, and now we've basically had a month to find out what our online voice is, which is something different. It's not completely different, but it's an evolution of it. And yeah, I'm not saying I've found my voice yet. Well, if I have, it's just yelling into a webcam and forgetting that I'm not meant to swear before saying kids are watching.
So what worried me as a fan of, let's say, the comedy panel shows like Have I Got News for You, and also a fan of stand-up comedy, is I was worried about the lack of laughter around me. For the TV shows, I worried that it just wouldn't feel as funny. But I was really impressed with things like Have I Got News for You and The MASH Report, because it just shows up the quality of the writing, that we were laughing out loud, even though the audience weren't telling us it's okay, basically. But in a stand-up gig, I just, it is a completely different feeling, isn't it? You're not with a group of people around you who are all laughing. And for me, I get nervous that the comedian also doesn't know. It puts me slightly on edge that they don't know what's funny and what's not. And you've just got that kind of tumbleweed feeling all the time. You can't avoid it. I mean, it must be terrifying. Do
you know what? I don't think I would do, although I have already, and it was with a live front row. New material is very hard to do online without an audience, because it's so symbiotic, that relationship of working up new material, because you're basically taking this like precious butterfly of an idea and you're like, is this rubbish? And they're like, yes, or like, no, let it fly. So I think you definitely need some kind of live audience if you're doing new material. But if you're doing tried and tested, you know where the funnies are. Also, I think if you're coming up now as a comedian, if you start, I've been doing it 10 years, and I think if you started, basically from when I started onwards, you will have slightly been used to this kind of thing anyway, even if it's just in terms of doing Instagram live videos, stuff like that, or like little bits on, your Instagram stories or TikToks. You don't necessarily get a physical reaction of laughter, but you'll get some kind of feedback that you then sort of work out, okay, what is that? How useful is that to me? And what does an audience want from me in this context? So I think slowly but surely we've been sort of picking up the information. Who knows? Maybe we've secretly been planning for pandemic comedy all this time, and that's really what Instagram was built for.
I think at least it's a new conspiracy theory, so they can lay off the
Great.
whatever else.
That can be how I make
spread it
money.
around for you. I can't see that going wrong. I was interested in something you said there about where you don't have a live front row as it were for the laughter, but you can in the same way that you can pick on the front row in a gig, you can pick on the front row, but you get transported to their living room. So that must give you even more material to work with. And hello, what's your name and what's your job? You can actually see the kind of pit they're sitting in.
I can, that's the thing is you go, so what do you do for a living, where you from? But I can be like, why that wallpaper, babe? What are we doing there? Yeah, it's fascinating. You're immediately in someone's life, and also it feels like you're approaching each other on more of a level playing field, because you're in their territory as much as they're in yours. Also, a lovely element of it is, sometimes a lot of comedy clubs, you can either pay to be on the front row. Let me tell you, the people on the front row are usually appalling in those clubs, because they're like, I'm the show. Or it's like, they tell you to sit there and there's some person who's like, oh God, please don't speak to me. Whereas on Zoom, they go, okay, yeah, I'll have a chat. And they, just by its nature, by being a comedy night that's run for charity and hosted by a woman, you sort of filter out all the people who would be difficult anyway, because they either don't think that women are funny or don't care about charity. So it's a great filter that you're usually being shipped into someone's front room who's really lovely, and lots of couples watch it together, lots of families watch it together. So it's actually been a really lovely thing, and I didn't realise how important it was to me, how much I needed the validation of strangers, but also that kind of interaction. I absolutely love it.
Have you found that your material has changed? I mean, that interaction with the audience is a different beast, I guess, now, is a richer beast for you. But have you found that the rest of your material or your other acts' material has changed because of the format? Not because of the subject matter, because obviously you can or can't joke about the situation we're in, but because you have, this box now, are people doing different things with it?
I think so. I think some people are trying to be really creative and see if they can bring music in and going, right, we've got loads of technology here. How do we harness that? Which is really exciting. I'm not bright enough or capable enough to be engaging in any of those things, but I've certainly noticed routines that I've had. Like, so I've got a routine that before this in my tour show, it's all about my boobs, but you can never see them, more's the shame. So it's pointless doing a routine about a set of boobs that you can't see on the screen, and you can't go, I'll give you a look just so you can see. So there's just certain things that you have to take into account of, like, the audience isn't seeing the whole of you. So a lot of people would sort of, would reference their appearance or their walk or their height, but we don't know what you are. You're just like a sort of a postage stamp profile. So I think it boils it down to, like, what are the clearest jokes that you're setting out about your persona, not your appearance, not your walk or anything like that, or your stature. It's what is it about you. So I think we're getting like slightly richer material out of that. Because you really have to dig into, right, well, what am I on stage, and what do I want to tell people about me? What do they want from me? I think it's making us evolve our comedy slightly.
I know that you're doing your gig for charity, but you're charging for tickets. And so I'm interested in how the economics stack up, because on the one hand, you can't charge as much for tickets, I guess, because you're not in the room. But on the other hand, you're not having to hire a venue. And on the third hand, you're not limited by the capacity of 100 seats or 200 seats. You could have, I guess, thousands if you're lucky. So what are the economics like?
Well, we usually have it sort of depends, and it's actually less to do with lineup and more to do with press coverage. But we have sort of most gigs between 3,000 and 1,000 people, which is obviously like quite a big gig. So that'll just be depending on, if we get a nice mention in a paper, that'll make a big difference. And I think it is slightly tailing off as everything, unlocks, shall we say. But we've got quite a core group of members, and a lot of people actually have said, the reason why we've gone from weekly to monthly is because a lot of people have said they still have to shield, and a lot of them love live comedy and weren't able to go anyway because of babysitting, mobility issues, a spectrum of things. So the economics, honestly, if this was a gig run for anything other than the love of it, it wouldn't stack up.
Why not?
Because Jake, the producer who does all the tech, does it for free. Jess, who does the website and the design, does it for free. I do it for free. The actual logistics, the admin of paying for the website, paying for the hosting, the Zoom thing, comes out of my wages. So it's probably about once a month we'll sort of nibble into something there, and the rest of mine, like I say, will go to the Trussell Trust or a different charity that's appeared that week that I think should have it. It's paying the comedians quite well, although lots of them donate their fees straight over, either to the other comedians or they give it to the Trussell Trust. But it's a well-paid gig for an online gig, but also with the view that you probably won't be able to, you'll do it once and never again. Do you know what I mean? It's not the kind of thing where I can go, great, let's book you in again in a month. It is a similar audience, so maybe people could come back in a year, but who knows if it'll still be running in a year. So it wouldn't work. The margins, unless we stopped donating half to the Trussell Trust, then it would probably stack up a bit more. But I don't think we necessarily want to do that. Because, the conversation, lots of people, and Jess and Jake are always like, you should take your fee. But the conversation I have with myself every week is, do you need this more than someone who's using a food bank? And the answer is always no. So as long as this situation is happening, and I think we're only just beginning to start to see this sort of economic impact, we'll always keep raising money for the Trussell Trust is my feeling.
Yeah, I was just wondering whether, like I say, aside from the charity thing, which is of course brilliant, whether in the future we might see online comedy shows as a viable thing. Where am I going wrong with my thought that if you don't... So venues closing is also terrible, but let's assume that that's going to happen because we can't get back in the same room as each other. If you don't have to hire a venue, you still have to pay a couple of technicians, I guess, like you would, and you have the potential to have a much larger audience. Part of me is thinking, actually, that makes a lot of sense for live comedy in the future. Totally.
And one thing that's come out of this is I think that when and if my tour comes back, I will have a digital date on the tour. So I think I would host, it would come from the COVID Arms under that banner. And also, because I've got a podcast, which means that you automatically have an international following. So there's loads of people who want to see me in Australia or Canada or America, but I cannot, I can't fly to those places and get the visas and perform there, but I can do an online version of my tour show. Also, it means that, anyone who wasn't able to get a babysitter that night or whatever, or, has anxiety, gets to go and see it as well. But I think there'll always be people who want, there's people who always want to buy the record, and there's people who are happy with the download. So I think most people want to come and be in the room with you, but I do think for people where that's not possible, they would relish the chance to see your work anyway. Because most comedians don't get a Netflix special, or, they don't get those things. So it's a way of bridging the gap there and bringing stuff to your audience. In fact, there's a problem here that I think so few people understand the economics of the British comedy circuit, how it works and why it's so special and a world leader. And it's because we're a tiny nation that hates anyone from 10 miles down the road. And that's actually why it works, because if you set up a comedy night here, you can set one up 20 minutes away on the same night, and it's fine because those groups of people never mix. And it means that as a comedian, well, you can open that gig and close that gig, and if it's £200 to open or close, you're making a decent wedge, and you should be able to gig, depending on where you are in the country, and if you've got transport, etc., you should be able to gig a minimum 3 times a week. Whereas we can't replicate that with online gigs. There just isn't the appetite from audiences to see live comedy online in that way.
And you do probably burn through material, don't you? You can't do a run of 14 shows where you can't do the same material every night because the risk is that the same people will come every night.
Yeah, because like with a normal weekend comedy club, say like the Frog and Bucket in Manchester, I can go, I'll get a weekend there, so I'll do Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and I can do the same material every night, and people aren't going to be like, hold on, I was here last night. Whereas online, it's comedy nerds who are into it, who are supporting that stuff, and they probably would come every night and be deeply disappointed.
Right, this is I've just thought of this question, and I think it's brilliant, but it might turn out not to be, and it might need a lot of kind of consideration. Is there, if we do have to continue doing these gigs remotely for the foreseeable future, is there anything that we can't do technologically at the moment that would help if you could have it? And I don't know whether I'm talking about a holographic audience in front of you, which is a bit too far-fetched, whether it is the ability to hear everyone, whether it is the ability to have roving cameras. Is there anything that you think would help you to do a better gig from the COVID arms?
I think I think the gigs that I've done where they've had live front rows who get it and get what their role is as a live front row have been brilliant. I do not think that is typical of most audiences who go and see comedy. I think those are quite invested comedy nerds, and I mean that with love. It's not disparaging. So perhaps a way around that, though, is to have a bit like when you watch live at the Apollo, like you hear the laughter, so there'll be a way of doing that, and it cuts away to someone laughing as well, because sometimes our brain just needs a bit of kick to go, think about that, and you go, oh God, yeah, that was really funny. I didn't even get it. I wasn't even following. That's what really, when people are like, oh, I hate laughter tracks or anything, canned laughter, and you're like, it's reminding you to laugh because you're too thick to do it, and you do it when it's on there. That's all it is. So I think that something that cutaways would be kind of great, and also I think that the only problem with things like this we are limited in what we can see. Like, I've been talking to a couple of venues who have got a really good sort of technical setup. So you would do the comedy like you would on a big stage, and you would stride around and you'd do an act out here, which is such a big part of comedy that we've pretty much had to get rid of because we can't do them. And you'd still be able to take it in as an audience. You might lose some of the intimacy of just talking to someone on a webcam or seeing someone on webcam in their house, which I think is part of the novelty. I didn't even buy this curtain, I just had it anyway.
Sure, I can believe that. I can believe that.
But I think you could sort of recreate some of the magic and pizzazz of a live show like that. It would need a lot of, Wizard of Oz people behind the curtain making it happen. Whereas at the moment, the kind of beauty is that if you've got a webcam and a laptop, and in my case, several flattering lights that you bought from the internet, you can do an online gig. And it feels like it's actually rectified an issue we have in comedy, which is representation. So before it was sort of like, can you afford to get to the gig? Can you afford to gig for free? Whereas this is like, most people, obviously this is not, most people have an internet connection and they can use Zoom on their phone or on their laptop. So it suddenly sort of reinstates a bit of a meritocracy. That, it's just like, well, if you're happy to do the online gig, you can do it. But genuinely, one thing is, comedians, if you're watching this, or anyone else, even if you Zoom all day, get yourself a cheap and cheerful light, because looking at your own face all day is hard work. But I tell you what, if you blast enough watts in your face, like it takes years off. And also it's just that thing of like, the quality of the picture is better. And it's just comedians, we're so used to just rocking up and there's a mic there and everything's done for us. And all the comedians now have been like, just go and buy a light. It'll be like 12 quid off eBay. And they're like, this has changed my life. And I'm suddenly seeing them doing all these selfies. And I'm like, yeah, it has. And all it needed was, honestly, it takes like every light, I've got 2 on me at the moment, takes 10 years off and adds a lion. So like, I would say, if you're going to invest in any technology, get yourself a bit of decent lighting. But I would say, yeah, I hope it means that we're going to get a brand new sort of wave of people who are far brighter than I am, who are really engaging with the technology. Because I think we're only just realising what it can be at the moment. We're trying to replicate the live experience in a room. And I think what you do is you get rid of that and you go, what are these resources and what can we do with them, and take a look at it like it's a brand new frontier, that's when the really exciting stuff will happen.
Listen, thanks so much for your time. Best of luck with the next gig.
Have a nice day then. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.